Well, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, how many unaccompanied minor children from Central America are being relocated to Maryland, and how much will it cost Montgomery County taxpayers? Candidates are entering the final lap before the election in November. Which are the races to watch for? And what happened while we were away? What were the most important stories of August? Stay tuned for our panel of insiders to give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the former Majority Leader of the Maryland House of Delegates, John Hurson, the former Chairman of the Montgomery County Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, Republican activist Jerry Cave, and Democratic political consultant Susan Heltemes. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. This week takes the month of August off, and now that we've reconvened, our panel will take a look back at what proved to be a rather tumultuous month of August. There were many important stories that occurred this past month. Locally, the political corruption trial of former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell and his wife fascinated many, while the national news was dominated by the shooting that occurred in Ferguson, Missouri. John, what do you think was the most important domestic story?
I think the month of August, the most important story was Ferguson. And I think it is because I think it's going to change the dynamic of the November race. I think it's an issue that has rallied minorities to be more active, which in normal years, in an off-term election year like we have, you don't usually get very good turnout by minorities. And I think this issue has really elevated their interest. I do think the trial of the Virginia governor is very important, and the outcome is very important. I think it shows that there is still a very, very high sense of ethics that the public holds for these officials, and that you really can't, even in a place like Virginia, where there's a very, very sketchy reporting system in terms of ethics, I think the public is going to hold people accountable. So I think they're both important stories. I think Ferguson's more important.
Thank you. Mark, what do you think was the most important story? It doesn't have to be those two, but what do you think?
Although I have to say that the McDonnell trial has all the elements of, sex and tabloid journalism meets politics, and it was a compelling story in a way that we as humans like to watch train wrecks. It's just a very unfortunate trial all the way around.
Jerry, what do you think was the most important story in the month of August?
The made-up media hype of Ferguson. When you and I were in high school, they were burning 14th Street along with 24 other American cities. The campuses were on fire. We had riots that were real riots. Ferguson is something that's created by the media, that cable TV has nothing to do but talk about it, hype it up for exactly the reason of what Mr. Hurson just said, to make believe that this is a racist country so everybody comes out and votes Democratic. When you look at what happened in Ferguson compared to what happened when we were growing up, you can see how hyped that is. But the most important story, that was the least important, most important story is the impact of the unimpeded invasion by illegal immigrants and the effect it's having on state economies, the federal economy, and the destruction it's doing to future generations.
Get to that in just a minute. Susan, what is your most important story for the month of August?
I'm going to do a slightly different take on the immigration issue, which I think Congress left at the beginning of August and just ignored this issue. The House said, we're not going to deal with immigration. The Senate was willing, so the president then says, I'm going to do something about it, and there was a big to-do. The president got out and said, you can't keep sending your children. They will go back, but the law was passed when George W. Bush was president that these young people deserve their day in court. And so as a result, these young people, although the rate at which they're coming across the borders has just drastically declined, these young people are going to get their day in court. Well, and they are not animals. They are human beings.
Well, where do you get the idea that anybody is considering them animals?
Well, some people are talking about that in the media, that, what is wrong? Well, when you think about what a parent or a child will do to walk thousands of miles to get away from depression, oppression, gangs, crime. It is just the most horrendous, heart-wrecking story. And those kids deserve their day in court.
Well, I think the immigration issue is a very important one, because we're going to talk about it for a full segment later this afternoon in the program. So I agree with you, but I also agree with John about the Ferguson trial, the Ferguson case, because it did show a racial divide, whether it was manufactured or not, Jerry. There is a racial divide in our country that doesn't seem to heal. And we don't know all of the facts that occurred in Ferguson. We don't really know anything about Michael Brown's background, whether or not he was the gentle giant that was first portrayed, or the thug that was portrayed later on in a video. So we don't really know anything.
I'm just glad you didn't agree with me.
I think one of the issues here is that you have a series of these incidents where young black men are
Murdered.
Well, murdered. Some would say murdered. Some would say by police action, all of a sudden lose their life somehow. And the buildup of that over time, I think, has created this sense that there's a serious problem here about how we handle these issues.
And what's
wait a minute, I got to take. Yes, but what you're looking at are incidents that happen over years, John. I think statistically we get confused by saying there are all these incidents when we've got to really separate and analyze the time frame these things happen.
I think you're right. But I think that the African American community is right to say, you've got Trayvon Martin. Okay, that was not a police.
Wasn't killed by a policeman.
You're absolutely correct.
But it was a young person
who
was shot to death.
who there's questions around how that happened. And then you have another incident like we had with this incident in Ferguson. And I think this over time, you said it, Casey, there's this divide that this fuels that divide. And how to deal with that is a major issue.
The topic on this show really shows how and supports the polling, that there is a different view between whites and blacks about the fact pattern and how these incidents occur. What's the driving factor, and who's to blame for them?
Right.
I at least with respect to Ferguson, there's a lot we don't know that we're going to find out about. Whether or not this is a racist police force is going to be determined by the Department of Justice, and whether or not Officer Wilson, isn't that his name? Officer Wilson is guilty of murder or was protecting his own life is also going to be.
And Casey, the thing that we haven't talked about though, and now Congress is going to look at it, is all of this surplus military equipment that was given to
What's
cops.
wrong with that?
Well,
don't they have a right to protect themselves?
No.
When they go into a riot area, are they supposed to just walk in and be struck?
No, I don't want.
Casey, most equipment went to a place called North Dakota. Now, I'm pretty familiar with North Dakota, having grown up in western Minnesota. And as someone in Congress said, a Republican no less, if North Dakota needs this kind of weapons, we're in trouble as a country.
Look, we got to go to break, but this is nonsense when you talk about the military surplus. You put in an application and you get the property. All right, when we come back from this short break, will the influx of unaccompanied immigrant children have an impact right here in Montgomery County? And we're going to take a look at the political season as it heats up and what are the hot races to watch for between now and November. Stay tuned.
Packers. Viking. Packers. Viking. Viking.
Red state, blue state, vegan,
Carnivore.
We come from different places.
Uptown.
downtown,
Optimist.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
half full.
But when we live united, we create real, lasting change in the building blocks of life. The education, income, and health of our communities,
Live.
our families,
United.
even the person next to us.
Live united.
Real change won't happen without you. So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up at liveunited.org.
I've just insulted my entire panel during the break. Now, according to press reports, as many as 50,000 unaccompanied immigrant children will be entering the public school system nationwide. The Office of Refugee Resettlement has estimated that 2,800 of which are going to be located and relocated to Maryland. The Washington Times reports that 960 children have been placed with sponsors in Prince George's County. And believe it or not, the Gazette reports that only 50 minors have been entered into the Montgomery County public school system. When you compare the numbers, that seems rather shockingly low. A 2009 report by the Federation of American Immigration Reform estimates that 9.6% of the K through 12 public school students in Maryland are children of illegal aliens, and that Marylanders spend more than $900 million annually on education for an estimated 80,000 children of illegal aliens. The report concluded, and this was a 2009 report, that the annual fiscal burden amounts to about $790 per Maryland household. John, as a former state delegate, these are tough issues. What are the considerations that you have to take into account when responding to this type of challenge?
The first factor you have to take into account is whether or not that child was born in the United States, because that child is a citizen of the United States, okay? So I don't care if their parents were illegal aliens. They are citizens of the United States. They are just like every other child who needs to be educated in this country and receive the best education we can provide them, that we can afford. So I don't, that distinction definitely needs to be made. Now, there's another distinction, which is whether or not those children were brought here by, over their illegal immigration parents. How do we treat them? Because they didn't have free choice in coming to this country. They were brought by their parents. And I think you need to treat those children the same way as we treat every other child in the school system. I mean, they were brought here, and that's, something that we need to give them the same benefits that every other child we find in our school system. So I don't see this as a real questionable issue, Casey. I mean, I know you've raised it here today, but we have an obligation in the society to educate the children who are in our communities. And the two types that you have are ones that were born here, no matter who the parents were. Those are U.S. citizens. And the type who were brought here were brought here not of their own, they didn't cross the border on their own free will, and they need to get the same benefits.
Well, let's see what the other panelists have to say, and then we'll open up for discussion. And part of this, Mark, and this is kind of the driver that I want to talk about, is education is a congestible government-supplied good. It's primarily funded by state and local governments, and a large increase in the number of immigrant students will increase education costs substantially for the local and state governments, but it may also reduce the quality of that education for the students already enrolled in the school system. How does one balance, as John is correctly pointing out, a humanitarian need with a fiscal need of we don't have an unlimited budget? So how would you address that?
Well, Casey, we need to put our finger on what has been driving this phenomena. It's not that something new happened in Central America. This is a direct response, an unintended response, but a direct response of the perception that amnesty would be given, that if you got in across the border, that you would have a privileged status vis-a-vis everybody else.
Let's talk about the impact that now that these children are here, what do we do about it?
Well, I mean, the constitutional law on this it really hasn't changed for 30 years. It really is not a policy debate other than because of the constitutional law that basically backs up the proposition that John's made. The way to address the issue is not by addressing the education policy, it's by addressing the phenomena that we've got of what we've created a situation. If you reward coming to the United States, then you're going to get more of that. And that's precisely what we've seen with this prospect of amnesty. And with not any expectation that if you don't get here...
Wait a minute, I want to ask Jerry about this. Jerry, that's all well and good, but the unintended consequences are that some of our poorest schools, our most overcrowded schools, are going to be further overcrowded and burdened by the admission of these children. How do you address that?
This is the most insane babble I've ever heard. Absolutely.
Thank you,
This
Jerry.
country absolutely cannot afford to be the welfare agency for Central America. Newsflash. Look at the numbers. And this is wholly dishonest on the Democrats' part, because they're like, oh, we want to help the children. Oh, we want to help. They're illegal immigrants. There's no reason for new laws. They don't enforce the existing laws. And what we're doing is we're not saying, oh, we're going to pay for these poor kids. We're saying our children and our grandchildren, we're going to heap debt on them, take away services for them
Right.
to give to illegal. And you know what? I know everyone wants to shut me up on this, but illegal immigration has depressed wages. It's hurt American workers. It's ruining the schools. It's draining state coffers. It's bankrupting states. And it's all done to get more Democratic voters, and it's not unintended. It's wholly intended.
We have a moral obligation.
No, we
to-
don't have a moral obligation to spend our money that are supposed to be for our citizens for Central America.
see-
10% of the Hondurans in the world live in the United States. That's insane.
Yeah, but
we
John
don't have
is
borders.
right.
We don't
If-
have a
Let's
country.
If a child is born in the United States,
Fine,
they are.
that's born in the United States.
But let me
Next.
finish. You know what, Jerry? We are whining about 50 students here. A couple of
No,
years
we're not. This is a huge issue.
Jerry, let me finish. A couple of years ago, 1,500 students came into the Montgomery County school system from the employees of the World Bank, because the World Bank would no longer pay for their private education. That was 1,500 students. As best I know, their parents aren't paying a hell of a lot of taxes either. So, it happens all the time living where we live.
I don't know.
50 students
What you just said doesn't have any...
Yes, it does, because that put a burden on our school system, and you and I
I'm
are
talking
paying.
about a problem of billions and billions of
Well, then-
dollars for state governments that's bankrupting them.
Then why
And
is the
it's- and it- and
Republican House not willing to talk about
Why would
immigration?
they make another law that the president's not going to
no.
enforce?
Oh, give me a break. It is a
None of the
federal.
presidents have enforced it.
It is
Republican
a
or
federal
Democrat.
issue, and they refuse to discuss it.
They
And so
refuse to do what you want, and God bless them for
Yeah.
it.
Right.
they
The
aren't
issue-
doing anything. They walked away from
Amnesty-
summer vacation
What's
and
the-
said,
what's-
"Screw
what's-
it."
What's
Because
Obama done?
amnesty
He
wouldn't
doesn't even
address-
enforce the
Come
law.
on. Let's keep it in a rational basis
All right.
here.
Amnesty doesn't address this issue.
We're not talking about amnesty.
Amnesty encourages more of the influx, and that's what's driving this
And
influx
nobody,
right now.
President
Mark,
Obama hasn't
there-
said
we're-
anything
Mark,
about
we're
getting
amnesty.
We're
There was
getting
a-
way afield.
There was a bipartisan bill passed by the United States Senate that the House refused to take up, even refused to take up in pieces. And the president offered to take it up in pieces. That is not an
There is a
appropriate.
logjam of
that is
legislation.
that is
That's
a
the
problem.
truth.
And the influx demonstrates the misguided nature of that
All right.
Senate bill.
You know what, ladies and
Mark.
gentlemen, we're going to go on to our next topic, because there's only one way to solve the logjam in Congress, and that's through elections. And so
Get
we're
rid
going
of
to
all the Democrats.
we're going to talk about the election cycle, because politicians of all stripes generally spend the summer months kissing babies, attending county fairs, going to parades, because they want to gain a little visibility and notoriety. And while Labor Day weekend marks the start of the final push for the November elections, I'm going to ask each one of you, what are the races that we should watch for over the next 8 weeks? Jerry.
You all laughed at me on this show on many occasions. But the one I'm referring to now is when I said the Democrats were going to go and expend all their ammunition fighting each other, come into this
I need
election.
a race.
Huh?
A race. Give me a race.
Hogan, governor. They were going to. I told you that they were going to waste their. They were going to expend their ammunition, come into the gubernatorial, not be ready for it, and Hogan's in there fighting like the Irishman he is. He's going to give them more of a fight and more of a challenge than they had figured on. And what are you going to laugh at me next for?
We'll find something. Mark.
Well, I agree with Jerry. The governor's race is much tighter than I think a lot of the pundits would have said a few months ago. And it's very different than 4 years ago, where we had ads all during the summer. This is a very competitive race. It's a real sleeper race nationally, but one that here in Maryland, voters got to make a decision.
John.
Unfortunately, I agree with both of these Republicans. I think that the race to watch is really actually the gubernatorial race, and I think the reason for that is there's a national problem that is, affecting Maryland as well, which is the issue of turnout. It is critically important that Democrats in the state turn out. If they turn out, then Anthony Brown will win. But that's the most important race to focus on, and it is a close
We're getting
race.
this thing. Susan.
8 years ago, O'Malley was fewer points ahead of Ehrlich at this time, but there's a race I'm watching in my home congressional district of Minnesota. Colin Peterson, who is not a liberal Democrat, is running a Republican named Weston. Watch this race. His opponent is blind. As he said, I don't carry a big stick, I carry a white cane. And it's an interesting race.
Thank you, panel. And the one race I thought someone would mention is the race between Congressman Delaney and candidate Don Bongino, who thinks he has a great shot at an upset here. When we come back from this short break, we're going to talk party shots.
In 1977, in Johannesburg, South Africa, an 8-year-old boy picked up the game of golf from his father. By the age of 9, he was already outplaying him. The odds of this gentle lad winning the Junior World Golf Championships at the age of 14, 1 in 16 million. The odds of that same boy then making it to the US and European Pro Golf Tours, 1 in 7 million. The odds of the Big Easy winning the Open Championship once and the US Open Championship twice, 1 in 780 million. The odds of this professional golfer having a child diagnosed with autism, 1 in 88. Ernie Els encourages you to learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs. Early diagnosis can make a lifetime of difference.
And welcome back. Now with party shots, John Hurson.
2, actually. I want to, give a yahoo to both the Redskins and the Ravens. Start of the football season. We have a chance to really do something great, so I'm very, very hopeful there. Second one, a shout out, and I can't believe I'm saying this, to Newt Gingrich for saying that he thought that the president did the right thing, being very careful about what we do in taking on ISIS. We have to have a very smart strategy, and the president was right, according to Newt Gingrich. So that's my shout out.
Thank you, John. Mark Uncapher, your parting shot.
Well, given the decibel level so far, I'm also going to end on a more bipartisan note and do a shout out positive to Peter Francho for opposing this week the contract for the Common Core testing. This is a RFP that requires that a particular vendor be picked because they've got the computer software. He said that's not the way to go. We're learning with this Common Core that what was well-intentioned in terms of raising standards and accountability in its execution has not included students and parents and teachers in the positive way that they should have been included.
Thank you, Mark. Jerry Cave, your parting shot.
Charity. If you were brought up in a Judeo-Christian faith, you're taught that that is one of your obligations. And if you are not, it's still part of our country. But there's a big difference on how we do it in this country. Conservatives tend to do it with their own time and their own money. Liberals and Democrats want to do it with the government because they want to do it with somebody else's money, and now it's future generations' money. When you look at presidential candidates, conservatives are more charitable. When you look at the regions of the country that vote Republican, they are more charitable, even though they have less money. And if it wasn't for the scowl on your face, I wouldn't know that I was on point, and that's my parting shot.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Susan Heltemes, your parting shot.
Okay, I want to congratulate CVS a month ahead of schedule. They are no longer selling smoking products. Congratulations. And also, I want to commend the president of the University of Minnesota, Eric Kaler. During the time when the Vikings are building a new stadium, the Vikings are playing in the Gopher Stadium. And he has told the owner of the Vikings if they are going to play there, the Washington football team cannot be named and they cannot have logos because it goes against the principles of the University of Minnesota for inclusiveness and sensitivity Go, President Kaler. I'm proud of you. By the end of the season, the Redskins will be no more.
Well, that's an interesting comment, but I want to thank the panel for being here today. But the one thing that should be pointed out is that Labor Day is a traditional point in the baseball season when you look at the pennant races. Right now, the Washington Nationals and the Baltimore Orioles are leading their respective divisions, and there's a high likelihood that they actually might meet in a Beltway series. And wouldn't that be fun? So I'm rooting for the Orioles for the first time in several years and the Nationals to win their respective championships and perform in the World Series. I think it would be great. I want to thank everybody for being here. It's been a lively evening to say the least. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in. And remember, we are now running a special series of interviews with political candidates. Tonight we interviewed Dan Bongino, who's running for Congress in the 6th District. And that interview will be posted on the website and will be shown in conjunction with 21 This Week. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.